Hi, this is Pushpa Naurim, and today we are going to talk about inflations and its types. As you know that inflations refer to the sustained increase in general level of prices for goods and services in an economy over a period of time. In other words, we can also say that inflation happens when prices go up and the value of money goes down over time. It can be good or bad for an economy, but it is usually considered that a little bit of inflation is okay because it shows that people are buying things and the economy is growing. And it can even encourage people to spend money and invest, but again, too much of inflation is considered bad. It makes it harder for people to save money and buy things they need, and it also makes it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. High inflations can cause problems like unsteady prices and can make it hard for the economy to grow. So, you know that inflation affects everyone, so it is important for policymakers, economists, and individuals to keep an eye on it and make smart decisions. When we talk about the different type of inflations, we are generally referring to three different aspects of inflations. First is demand pull inflations, and it happens when aggregate demand is greater than the aggregate supply. And second is a cost push inflations, and it takes place when there is an increase in production costs such as wages or raw materials, etc. And third type of inflations is defined by the rate of increase. For example, creeping inflations, walking inflations, running inflations, galloping inflations, hyperinflations, etc. And this type of inflations and how they interact with each other and how this work in the market, and this will be discussed in the following slides. You see, when demand pull inflations occur, it means that people want to buy more things than what is currently being produced. So businesses also started to increase the level of the price because they know that people are willing to pay more. This means that the purchasing power of the money has reduced. In other words, you can understand in this way that the amount of money that you have can't buy as much as before. This kind of inflations usually occur when the economy is doing really well with lots of growth, people spending lots of money, and the government doing things to make the economy grow even more. Now, let's try to understand demand pull inflations using these illustrations where you will see that along the x-axis, aggregate demand and aggregate supply is represented, and along the y-axis, price level is represented. And you will see that AS, which represent the aggregate supply curve, it rises upward in the beginning. You see, it rises upward in the beginning, but when the full employment level of OYF is reached, it takes the vertical shape. This is because after the level of full employment, supply of output cannot be increased at all. You see, when the aggregate demand is AD1, okay, the price level was OP1 and output level was OY1, but let us assume that if the aggregate demand it further increases to AD2, and you see that the price level also increases to OP2, and you see that rise in the price level has also brought about increase in the aggregate output supplied from OY1 to OY2. And like that, if the aggregate demand further increases to AD3, the price level also rises to OP3 under the pressure of more demand in the market. But since the aggregate, aggregate supply curve is sloping upward. See, this portion is sloping upward, right? So increase in the aggregate demand from AD2 to AD3 has led to increase in the output from OY2 to OYF. And say if the aggregate demand further increases from AD3 to AD4, let's say, then only price level it will increase to OP4 with the output remaining constant at OYF. OYF is the full employment level or output, and aggregate supply curve is perfectly inelastic at this portion. This is because at this portion, no matter how much demand is increased in the market, there will be no increase in the level of output, but only the price level will increase. And this is how demand pull inflations take place. Now come the cost push inflations. Cost push inflations, it take place in the economy because of various reasons. One of the important reason is increase in the wage level. And you see that when wages of the worker increases, it became more expensive for companies to pay for their employees. And to cover this higher cost, companies increase the price of the things they sell in the market. This happens because they need to make enough money to afford the increased wages. And sometimes when people earn more money, they also start buying more things, which adds to the higher demand and can cause prices to go up. And second factor is increase in the price of the raw material. Let's say if the price of oil goes up, it means that petrol prices and transportation costs will also increase, and this affects all companies because they rely on oil for various purposes. Since oil is a crucial raw material, when its price goes up, it often leads to a situation called cost push inflations. This means that companies have to spend more money on oil, which raises their overall cost and can result in higher prices for goods and services. Then comes higher taxes, like increase in the level of VAT and excise duty will increase the prices of goods, and this price increase will be a temporary increase. Then comes profit push inflations, where you know that if a firm can increase monopoly power, then they are in a position to push up prices to make more profit. Okay, and that's how profit push inflations take place. And another factor like higher food price. In Western economies, food is a smaller percentage of overall spending, but in developing countries, it plays a bigger role. So when food price increases, inflation also takes place. Now, let's try to understand the cost push inflations using this diagram, where you will see that along the x-axis aggregate output is given, where it can be taken as aggregate supply and aggregate demand, and along the y-axis price level is given. And AS1 and AS2, it represent the aggregate supply, and AD, it represent the aggregate demand. And in this diagram, you see that when wages increases, the cost of productions in the company will also go up, and that's how it affects the overall supply of goods and services in the economy. This can be shown to the diagram, where aggregate supply curve it shifts to the leftward. Initially it was AS1, now shift to the leftward to AS2. Okay, and as a result of this, price level goes up from OP1 to OP2. In this situation, you see what is happening here is that aggregate demand curve, it remain the same. You see, aggregate demand curve will not change, it will remain the same, and the increase in the wages, it will lead to an increase in the price level due to the leftward shift in the supply curve. Here you can note that one of the important characteristics of cost push inflation is that it not only causes price to rise, but it also results in the decline in the overall output of goods and services. So again, if you observed it from this diagram, you see that increase in the level of price from OP1 to OP2, it led to the decrease in the level of aggregate output from OY1 to OY2. Okay, and this illustrates the negative impact of cost push inflations, where higher wages contribute to both higher prices and reductions in the total amounts of goods and services produced in the economy. And this is how cost push inflations happens in the economy. Now we are going to discuss interactions between demand pull and cost push inflations. Economists believe that inflations in the economy is often caused by a combination of demand pull and cost push factors. Initially, inflations can be sparked by either an increase in the demand or rising production costs. However, over time, both of these factors tend to work together and reinforce each other, leading to a sustained period of inflations. In other words, the interactions between demand pull and cost push factor is responsible for the continuations of inflationary pressure in the economy. So, like interactions of demand pull and cost push inflations can be discussed in two ways. One, the inflationary process when it starts with cost push factor, and inflationary process when begin with a shift in aggregate demand. Now, let us try to understand the inflations process which start with cost push inflations in the first instance. Here you see that in this diagram along the x-axis it is represented the aggregate output, which is also aggregate supply and aggregate demand, and along the y-axis it is price level. And initially you see that aggregate demand and aggregate supply intersect at E naught and price level is P naught and aggregate output level is Y naught. Okay, so let us suppose that Y naught is the full employment level, and therefore long run supply curve, which is represented by LAS, is vertical at Y naught level of output. And suppose that there is an increase in the oil prices which causes a shift in the aggregate supply curve to the left from AS to AS1. As a result, price level also increases from P naught to P1. But as a result of it, output decreases from Y naught to Y1, and with decline in the output level, unemployment will also increase. And this is a cost push inflations which has caused recessionary conditions in the economy. And in a condition like this, the government or the central bank are likely to adopt expansionary monetary and fiscal policy in order to avoid it. Consequent to the adoptions of expansionary policy, for example, increase in money supply or increase in the government expenditures or reductions in taxes, aggregate demand curve will shift to the right, say to AD1, which intersect AS1 curved and LAS curved at E2. This one, okay? So, though as a result of this accommodatory policy, while output level has increased to the original full capacity level of Y naught, price level has further rises to P2. You see, price level has further rises to P2 level, and this later rises in the price level from P1 to P2 is the result of demand pull inflations. Therefore, from this it is clear that both cost push and demand pull inflations interact to cause inflations in the economy. Now, let's explain the process of inflations, which initially start with demand pull inflations. At first, in this diagram, you see that we have an intersections of the aggregate demand AD naught and aggregate supply curve AS naught at point E naught. And this determined the level of price at P naught and the level of output at Y naught. Here you can see that Y naught is the level of output and E naught is the level of equilibrium, and P naught is the level of price determined at E naught. Let's assume that the long run aggregate supply curve also passes through the point E naught, and it represents full employment level of output. And the price level P naught, it represents the long run equilibrium. So now let us suppose that there is an increase in government expenditure financed by creating new money, and therefore it caused the aggregate demand curve to shift from AD naught to AD1. Okay. Then the new aggregate demand curve AD1 now intersect the short run aggregate supply curve AS naught at E1, and as a result of it, in the short run the price level rises to P1 and the output increases to Y1. You see, price increases to P1 and the output level increases to Y1. Now it is important to note that the short-run aggregate supply curve is based on the workers' expectations of the price level, which is typically influenced by the recent past, here assumed to be P0. Now, with the actual price level rising to P1 due to the increase in the aggregate demand, workers' real wage will decline. To restore their real wages, workers would demand higher money wages, and when the demand for higher wages are met, the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, and this shift led to the increase in the price level. And the wage price spiral continues until the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to AS2. Now it has shifted to AS2, and together with the aggregate demand curve AD1, it has determined the new equilibrium point at E2. Okay, it is observed that both demand pull inflations and cost push inflations have worked together to raise the price levels from P0 to P2. You see, and in conclusion, you see that demand pull inflations and cost push inflations are intertwined and operate together to determine the rate of inflations over time. In practice, you will see that it is difficult to precisely determine the portions of inflations caused by demand pull factors and cost push factors. However, theoretically, we can differentiate between them, demand pull and cost push inflation, as we have just done it. Now, let's understand the types of inflations determined by the rate of increase. First is creeping inflations. When the rate of inflation slowly increases over time, for example, if the inflation rate rises from say 2% to 3% or to 4% a year, okay, creeping inflations may not be immediately noticeable, but if the creeping rate of inflations continue, it can become an increasing problem in the economy. Then there is working inflations. When the inflation is in single digit, that is less than 10%, at this rate, inflation is not a major problem, but when it rises over 4%, central bank will be increasingly concerned, and working inflations may simply be referred to as a moderate inflations. Then there is running inflation. Say when inflation starts to rise at a significant rate, it is usually defined as a rate between 10% and 20% a year. At this rate, inflation is imposing significant cost on the economy and could easily start to creep higher. Then comes the galloping inflations. This is an inflation rate of between 20% up to 1000%. At this rapid rate of price increases, inflation is a serious problem and will be challenging to bring under control. Then we have the hyperinflation, and you see that this is reserved for extreme forms of inflations. This is usually over 1000%, though there is no specific definitions. Hyperinflations usually involve prices changing so fast that it becomes a daily occurrence, and under hyperinflations, the value of money will rapidly decline. So, in this video, I have discussed what is inflations, what are the types of inflations, and under that we have discussed demand pull inflations, cost push inflations, and types of inflations by rate of increase. I hope you find this video helpful. Thank you for stopping by.